The Colorado Avalanche scored a dramatic win to increase their winning streak to 9 games. The Pittsburgh Penguins are at a crossroads, and the New Jersey Devils are looking ahead to next year as they cling to playoff hopes. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Shaggy Von Doom himself, the one and only Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche. And Kyle, great time to be an Avs fan. 9 wins in a row. And, how did they pull off down 4-0 against the Penguins and win this game in OT 5-4?
It's all about how this team is made up. It's at the beginning of the year, you had Ryan Johansson, you had Tomas Tatar, top to bottom, like Ross Colton, Miles Wood. You looked at this roster, it looked like a fantasy team. And yet this team would be careless and just kind of lose games. And it was just, they would win, but there was no oomph. There was no energy. There was no quote unquote, all the small things of the cup run team from 2022. And it was with a team like this, Nathan MacKinnon, by the way, 121 points. That is the most of an Avalanche player. That's most than Joe Sakic. He had 120. Now Nathan MacKinnon has that crown in Avalanche franchise history. That's a big number. And he has the home point streak. He's having a career year, almost a better than Gretzky type. Like he's having one of those, he's chasing a Gretzky record. All of this is going on, and the Avalanche are rattling off a winning streak after the trade deadline, after acquiring pieces that, trading out Ryan Johansson, that just didn't work. A Bowen Byram, they gave up on a young defenseman that was regressing. And after committing so much time to an Alex Newhook and that kind of leveling out and regressing, they traded him away. They did the same with Bowen Byram, and you can see the success that they have. This team believes in themselves. And Mikko Rantanen, Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, they're playing, and it's fun. This is the 25th time the Avalanche have come back and won a game. They're a third period team, and they're winning these games, and it's just fun. And you could hear it in their post-game interviews. They're having fun with this, and they believe in the makeup of this roster, and it's refreshing as an Avalanche fan.
Is there one move that was made at the trade deadline that you think made things really click for this team?
It depends on who you ask. If you're a defense wins championship guy, Sean Walker is your man. But if you're an Avalanche fan for the last 6-7 years, a 2C is what the Avalanche need, and that would be Casey Middlestat. He has been exactly what the Avalanche needed, and this team feels absolutely solid. The top 9 of this team feels like you could interchange them however you want and have success. It's almost equivalent to Vegas, how they rolled their lines to win the cup. That's how Colorado's looking this year.
How is Zach Parise looking right now for the Avs?
He's been injured off and on, but when the Avalanche picked him up, you wouldn't know he was sitting at his house, just training at his house. It was plug and play. Zach Parise's looked good for a 39-year-old. And for the amount of money they used on him and the role that he plays, he's great. But with this team, top to bottom, how they look, even Joel Kiviranta has a role in contributions. It's what night in, night out, this team, top to bottom, they know what is asked of them. And not one member is more important than the other. Everyone knows their role. They go in, do their job, and go home.
Tough race right now for the division lead. How important is it for this team to win the division, or, if they finish second or third, so be it.
See, that's where me and my co-host Chris Vaselli on Locked On Avalanche, we've had this discussion because it comes down to matchups. And after last year getting bounced by Seattle, that was embarrassing for the defending Stanley Cup champions. That's not what you want. And then if you broke it down to how it ends this season, that would be Nashville as a matchup potential. And they are also playing incredibly good hockey. And they are a team that you really don't want to match up with right now. Dallas is another matchup the Avalanche could possibly face. They've found success, but when it comes to the playoffs, there's a rocky history between the Avalanche and the Stars. So winning the Central, it's what you want to do, it's what you need to do, and it's some forward trajectory into the postseason, but it's all about matchups. So you're trying to win the Central and also looking behind you on where that falls in that matchup.
Is there a team you'd rather face? Or you said you wanted to avoid Nashville. Is there a team you would like to face out of the possibilities?
See, I like the Dallas matchup. If it's a perfect world, give me that Minnesota St. Louis bubble team, whoever's floating there. I don't want to have it come down to Winnipeg. They just play the Avalanche in a weird way that it just aggravates Colorado. And like I said, after the Seattle bounce, you don't want another first round exit. You want to keep building back to where this team potentially could be as a cup contender. And you don't want this to fall flat again because you already traded away Tomas Tatar, Ryan Johansson. You don't want every move that you made in the offseason to be a failure. And if you're bouncing the first round again, you're looking at all these wonderful moves and trades that we praised all season to be for nothing.
Obviously, I would assume you don't want to finish third because then you lose home ice.
Yes, and that's home is where the heart is and could be where the Hart Trophy winner is. And the Avalanche are incredible at home right now. And honestly, away is starting to work for the Avalanche again. At the beginning of the year, they set the record for most consecutive road wins. At the beginning of the season, they dropped that to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Ironically enough, they continue with their winning streak against the Pittsburgh Penguins in that comeback on Sunday, and they're continuing both home and away this win streak, and they're starting to win games commandingly on the road again. It's refreshing to see, but going into the playoffs, you definitely want to be at home because that plays to the Avalanche favor.
What is the update right now on Gabriel Landeskog? Will he be available come playoff time? And if so, what, if anything, can we expect from him?
See, this is where you got the wrong host of Locked On Avalanche because my co-host Chris Vaselli, he's always looking around the corner. He's optimistic for Landeskog's return. And I'm of the camp that we have probably seen Landeskog's last days, and the projection is that he will be ready for the postseason. But I beg the question, why? When you look at this team and what they're doing now, why do you need Gabriel Landeskog? No matter his contributions to the team are, there's not enough words in the English dictionary to provide what he could bring. But where does he fit into the playoffs? He hasn't played in 2 years. I get what he is to this team, but what can he bring that this team isn't already bringing right now?
You talked about Nathan MacKinnon. What makes him so special this year? What is he doing that has taken him to that next level?
It's honestly like he challenges himself. He got the Stanley Cup. Now he's looking for the next thing. He's looking for, it's always McDavid is the highlight. It's every time Connor McDavid does something, he commands the attention of everyone. Nathan MacKinnon deserves that attention as well. And he wants it on himself. And it's almost like Nathan MacKinnon plays the game where there's an extra gear or two that he just doesn't use. He's that skilled. He's a hockey robot, and he goes out there and has fun with it. This year, it's almost like he's going for that Hart. He's got that Stanley Cup. He wants that Hart Trophy this year, and he's doing everything in his power to get it. That's why you're watching this incredible race between him and Kucherov. It's like they're challenging each other because Nathan MacKinnon wants it that bad.
All right, Kyle, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
You can find Locked On Avalanche on YouTube. Anywhere you find your podcast, just look Locked On Avalanche. You'll find us with the burgundy logo. And you can find me on socials at Shaggy Von Doom anywhere you look. Locked On Avalanche as well on socials. Just search Locked On Avalanche.
All right, Kyle, always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure, my friend.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, so Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time, you go on the app and you can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time has deals on tickets not only up to the start of the event, but even an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. It is my pleasure to welcome a familiar face to Locked On NHL viewers and a familiar voice for our listeners, Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins. And Hunter, tough afternoon for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Up 4-0, lose in overtime to the Colorado Avalanche. What went wrong?
Well, Gil, they took the foot off the gas pedal. They played a tremendous first period. That was probably their best first period they've played since December. They were all over the Avalanche. They won every puck battle. They were forechecking the hell out of the Avalanche, making them really defend in their own zone. You got goals from Brian Rust. Jesse Puljujarvi got his second goal of the season. And then even the first 10 minutes of the second period, I know the first 25, 30 minutes, the Penguins were really good. You get the goal from Sidney Crosby. You get P.O. Joseph's first goal this season. Sidney Crosby had a 4-point day, and it all went to waste because this team cannot play a full 60 minutes. The final 25, 26 minutes of that game were fully dominated by the Avalanche. And once the Avs made it 4-1, I could tell that this was probably going to end in a disaster. I was holding out hope that if they could get to the second intermission up 4-1, they potentially could win this game. But also when the Avs made it 4-2 in the final minute of the second period, I'm like, okay, I don't see any way they don't blow this, considering they've blown quite a few leads entering the third period so far this season. And sure enough, they allow an early one in the third, and then they allow another one with less than 6 minutes to go before losing in overtime. But it's another failure of not playing a full 60 minutes, and another failure of wasting a vintage Sidney Crosby performance. He deserves better than this right now.
So what is it? I mean, besides the effort, what is this team lacking, or what is this team doing wrong?
Not enough goal scoring. They also have 3 defensemen who aren't really that good, to be honest. I mean, Erik Karlsson, he's definitely a lightning rod between people in the fan base right now. I think he's been as advertised, but that's also just my opinion. I think people had unrealistic expectations for Erik Karlsson this season based on what he did in San Jose. He was always going to be, I think, pretty good, but he was never going to hit 100 points. Marcus Pettersson's great. Chris Letang, I think for the most part, has been pretty good for the Penguins, though he's also had a rotten last few weeks to a month, but I feel like the team has honestly been checked out ever since the trade deadline, a little bit before the deadline as well. Outside of that, the forward depth is just non-existent, and that was one of the biggest concerns I had heading into the season. Outside of the top 6, where are the goals going to be scored? And yeah, you've had a good season from Lars Eller. I like that. Drew O'Connor has established himself as a decent third liner on this team. Yes, Puljujarvi's had a couple of goals. Valtteri Pustin's come up from Wilkes-Barre. He's not been bad, but outside of that, you have guys like Noah Chari, who don't really bring that much offensively. Matt Nieto, who's been hurt all year. Jansen Harkins wasn't really doing much for me either. Jeff Carter, this is probably his last year with the Penguins anyway, but when he's in the lineup, he's mostly not doing much either. They just have too much dead weight in the lineup this year, and it's been really hampering them as well. And speaking of, Riley Smith, I liked the move at the time. I thought it made a lot of sense pairing him with Evgeny Malkin. They'd be deadly off the rush, but Riley has just really not fit in for most of the season. I think you could see him get moved at the draft. So a lot of the moves that Kyle Dubas made over the summer have just not panned out. And some of them I figured would not pan out, but others I did not see coming, like the Riley Smith one. And you can maybe call the Carlson one disappointing, but I still would make that trade every single day. And I'd rather watch him over freaking Mikhail Granlund, Jan Ruda, Jeff Petrie, and Casey DeSmith. So those are a couple of the issues. And then the coaching staff. I really do feel like this team needs a new voice behind the bench. I have been a big fan of Mike Sullivan for a long time, but I think there needs to be a mutual parting of ways between the two sides this offseason and bring in a new coach that can establish his own voice and just get this team playing, a little bit differently for next season.
Other than the coach possibly being changed, I mean, this will be back-to-back seasons without the playoffs. What other changes do you anticipate? Because say what you want about Kyle Dubas, he doesn't stand pat.
No, he's going to be very active this summer, and he's even made it known that he wants to get younger around the core. People keep talking about this rebuild stuff, this rebuild thing. I don't think the Penguins are rebuilding this summer. I think what they're going to do is a very aggressive retool to try and at least make the dance for next season, because Sidney Crosby still has a year left on his contract, and people can say what they want, Gil. Sidney Crosby is going to sign an extension with the Penguins this summer, and I think it's going to happen on July 1st. I have not been told that at all, but I really do think that extension is coming on July 1, and it's going to be maybe a 2 to 3 year deal. He can finish his career here, and then he can go off and retire along with Gino Malkin and Chris Letang. That is what is 99.999% chance of going to happen. And if you do sign him, which again, I think that will happen, you owe it to him to try and get back to the playoffs next year. I don't want 2 years ago to be the final time I see Sidney Crosby playing a playoff game in a Penguin uniform. He deserves to get back to the playoffs after everything he has done this season. He's at a point per game yet again, continuing, to try and make NHL history. You owe it especially to him to aggressively retool this team and to make moves to better surround the core. That's been one of the biggest things the Penguins have not gotten right these last 2 years. The core, sure, Evgeny Malkin's declined a little bit. I don't think he's cooked. You can say the same about Chris Letang. You bring in Erik Karlsson, but they are not the main problems on this team. It's the supporting cast around them that has been bungled time and time again by 3 different management regimes, and that has to improve this summer if this team has any chance of getting back to the playoffs. I don't think they're a bona fide contender anymore. I don't expect that to happen, but the goal for next season, in my opinion, should be getting back to the playoffs.
You mentioned an extension for Crosby being 99.999% likely. How many years do you anticipate that extension being?
2 to 3. I think he's going to finish his career here. He could be superstitious and just ask for $8.7 million per year again, because that's the money he's making on his current deal right now when he signed that 12-year extension a long time ago. But, if he wants a raise, I mean, they'll just give it to him. He's Sidney Crosby over here. But I'm thinking a 2 to 3 year extension right now.
And, I totally get it. Sidney Crosby, face of the franchise, all-time great player, but is trying to sneak into the playoffs one more time for Sidney Crosby what's in the best interest of the franchise long-term?
I understand what you're saying. I think it's a fair question. I think as long as Sid is playing at this level, you owe it to him to try. And, he's continuing to show why he is one of the 10 best players in the league. And I would probably argue top 5, but I'm also maybe putting a little bit of my own bias in there. I mean, he's not Connor McDavid or Nathan MacKinnon out here, people, but I still think he's one of the best players in the league. I think you can look at that as a short-term thing, but also build for the future. That's kind of what you're seeing from Kyle Dubas with the Jake Gensel trade. I was a bit sour on the deal at the time, but I've warmed up to it a little bit more as the last couple weeks have gone by. I've really liked the play of Michael Bunting, especially. He's kind of a little bit of a rat that the Penguins haven't had in quite a while, like a very mini version of Patrick Hornquist that will drive opposing netminders crazy. You got the prospects back in the Gensel trade, which I know they're completely unknowns, but if you can hit on one of them, that's big. The biggest thing is, getting younger talent to surround Crosby for the next couple of years, but also for the foreseeable future as you transition into a rebuild. Everyone knows the rebuild for this team is going to be bad. I mean, that's the price you have to pay. When you win 3 Stanley Cups, you go to 4 finals, you go to 5 Eastern Conference finals. Every team has to go through it. But I just don't want to start a rebuild earlier than I have to. And I think as long as Sid is at this level, and I think he will be for next season, even though he'll be another year older, you owe it to him to try to get this team back in the playoffs. And I think that's what Kyle Dubas is going to do this summer. At least that's what he was talking about when he made the Gensel trade and all the other moves at the deadline.
All right, Hunter, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow the Locked On Penguins podcast wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, Sirius XM. I host it with my co-host Patrick Camp. You can follow him on Twitter at @CinemaForWet. And to everyone out there, I do host the Thursday NHL Power Rankings for the Locked On NHL show with Nick Zararis. A lot of fun, so check that out on Thursdays. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodies.
Hunter, thanks so much.
Of course, thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Regardless of where your favorite team is in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Ovechkin, or MacKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stacks. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New Jersey Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, 3 of the last 4, but that one loss really did hurt this team. Where are they at as we head into the home stretch of the season?
Honestly, they're holding on to a prayer. That's the best way I could put it. It's still possible that the New Jersey Devils can sneak their way into the playoffs, but not likely, because it's not enough for them to just win out. They're going to have to get some help from their opponents, and the teams are ahead of them in the wild card. That's definitely a tall order, and they've had opportunities to close the gap between them and the Detroit Red Wings for that second position in the wild card, but that loss to the Ottawa Senators, I think that's what really did them in. At this point, the Devils can only afford to lose, 2 more games? And to close out the season, they got to face Austin Matthews and the Toronto Maple Leafs 3 times, which is not an easy thing to do.
What happened against Ottawa? I mean, the previous game, you beat a very talented Winnipeg Jets team. After the Ottawa game, you blank my New York Islanders. Is it a consistency issue with this team?
Yes, absolutely. The only thing that's been consistent with this Devils team is their inconsistency, because the last time that they won 3 games in a row, you would have to go back to late December. And the amount of times that they have won back-to-back games in the calendar year 2024, 0. So that's where I'm at in terms of them trying to rack up these wins. I really do want to believe in them, but they haven't shown me that they're capable of doing so. It's been really hard for them to win just 2 games in a row. And forget about what other teams might have to do. At the conclusion of the Senators game, Bryce Salvador said on air, the Devils are going to have to win 9 of their next 11 games. Obviously, they won against the Islanders just recently in very good fashion. Kaapo Kähkönen, he recorded a shutout, and hoping for the best for Nico Hischier. Luckily, he was able to continue. But it's just not enough. Unfortunately, the Devils, they've just shot themselves in the foot, because they've left a lot of points on the board. With all due respect, losing to the Sharks, losing to the Canadiens, losing to the Ducks, losing to the Blue Jackets. I'm probably forgetting a few other teams, but losing to those types of teams that you could have come away with the win. You could have at least gotten 1 point, 1 or both those points. And now you're in a very awkward situation where you're on the outside looking in. The season is winding down, and it's not enough for you to just win out. You're going to need some help.
You mentioned Kaapo Kähkönen, and goaltending has been an issue all season for the New Jersey Devils. They bring in 2 new goalies at the trade deadline. Have they found a goalie that they're going to stick with and build around, or is this search ongoing?
I hope this search is ongoing, because this is exactly what I'm fearing. I'm fearing that Jake Allen and Kaapo Kähkönen, they have been phenomenal for New Jersey. They've been, I guess, the goalies that New Jersey's been looking for, which is just some someone that you can rely on in net. But the problem I'm having is that what if Tom Fitzgerald is convinced that these two goalies can possibly take the Devils to the promised land, and then we're in a situation where it's Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid all over again? That's my fear. In my opinion, no. Kaapo Kähkönen, he's been great for New Jersey. I'll give him credit where credit is rightfully earned, but I don't think the tandem of Allen and Kähkönen is going to work for New Jersey. So best case scenario, just let Kähkönen walk in free agency. That's the whole reason why you traded away Vitek Vanecek, so that way you didn't have to have him for this year and also next year. Kähkönen is a pending unrestricted free agent. Let him walk for nothing. Jake Allen could be your backup, but now you need a pretty solid goalie at that starting position. Could it be Jacob Markstrom? I don't really know. Could it be UC Soros? I don't think so. It wouldn't make sense for the Predators to trade him. Could it be John Gibson? I hear his contract scares a lot of people. Elvis Merzlikins, I do want to be fair. He has gone through a lot, but according to some people that I've talked to for the Devils, they're not really sure about him in terms of his personality. Like, they say he's sort of a head case, and which is why, despite wanting out of Columbus, he's still there. That's my thing, which is just like, I don't think Jake Allen and Kaapo Kähkönen should be the goalies moving forward. I think come next year, Jake Allen, if you want him to be backup, that's fine, but you need to find a top-notch goalie if you really are serious about getting back into the playoffs and making a legitimate run.
How about the coaching situation? Travis Green, an interim coach, is he back, or are they going in a completely new direction?
I hope they go in a completely new direction with Travis Green. I do like some of the stuff that he did. Like, for example, scratching Shimon Nemets just to give him a breather, because Shimon Nemets has been taking on a lot of responsibilities that I don't think he foresaw himself doing. And giving Alexander Holtz more chances. Alexander Holtz, has he been the best? No. But I still think he's very useful out there because he is a goal scorer. Yes, he has a lot of things to work on. He has to work on his stick work. He has to work on basically cleaning up the puck a little bit more and just make sure he cuts down on those turnovers. But I still think he could be serviceable for this Devils team. And I like that Travis Green has given him a longer leash compared to Lindy Ruff and also Tom Fitzgerald, the general manager. But in terms of being the permanent fix, no, thank you.
This team has dealt with a lot of injuries this season. We've talked about the goaltending situation. How close, if they stay healthy next year, do you think this team is to getting back into the playoffs and being a more serious contender?
You know, it's really hard to say because I thought last offseason they were going to be a for sure playoff team because they got Tyler Toffoli. They got rid of Damon Severson, Ryan Graves. They thrusted Luke Hughes into a bigger role. I thought this team was going places this season. Unfortunately, injuries, like you said, weren't really their friend. And the only thing that was consistent about this Devils team, like I said, has been their inconsistency. And my thing is, like, I want to have faith in Tom Fitzgerald. I really do. But he's got to fix the issues, which is the Devils, they need a better goalie. No disrespect to Jake Allen. No disrespect to Kaapo Kähkönen. And they also need a more sandpaper type defenseman because I think that's been one of the biggest issues for Devils, which is their defense as well. It's a two-way street. And I've said on my show many times, I don't think it's pick or choose, like which one is worse, goaltending or defense. I think it's a matter of like, what can you get to try to fix the situation? And at the deadline, the Devils were able to get a couple goalies to help them out. So I think they potentially can get back to the playoffs, but Fitzgerald really needs to hammer on home. Here are the issues, and it was on full display this year. Defense, not all that effective. Goaltending, not all that effective. How do you fix it now?
Well, looks like a search for the next Ken Danico is out there somewhere for the
I've actually spoken to Dano about it. Like I saw him in Vegas because he and Bill Spalding had the night off because they do the play-by-play and color commentator for MSG. I spoke to him. I said, "Hey Dano, any chance you might want to like suit up and get back out there?" He just laughed and said, "Nope."
Well, they need someone to play that role for certain. Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can find me on Twitter or X at TreyMat4, and you can find Locked On Devils wherever you get your podcast from. Available on all podcast streaming services and also YouTube.
All right, Trey, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want to thank my guest, Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche. I want to thank Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins and Trey Matthews of Locked On New Jersey Devils. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I also co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, Locked On NHL is here for you every weekday, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the league, so don't miss an episode. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, thank you so much for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.